Good morning, seventh grade. Nice spring weather, so I thought I'd wear my spring tie. So it's kind of weird. You see here Road to War, Europe and the World, early 20th century. So Washington State history, why are we talking about this? World War I definitely had an impact on all of the United States, Washington included. So I just want to set some background information down first, and then when we get back from spring break, we'll talk more about what happened in Washington during World War I. So, this first slide talking about imperialism in South and Southeast Asia. So, in 1914, as you can see, pretty much everywhere in South and Southeast Asia is controlled by a European power, except for Siam, which we know today as Thailand. Um, and so, again, I'm just setting the groundwork here. Here's a map of Africa. And so, what's really interesting, you look at this graphic down in the lower left, it shows you colonial presence in Africa. And you can see there's just a few little enclaves around the coast. And then if you fast forward, I don't know, what is that, 22 and 36 years, and here you have Africa completely carved up. The only two independent nations that remain are Ethiopia and Liberia, which is interestingly a state that was established by freed slaves from the United States. So the reason I showed you these slides is when we talk about World War One, it's a great example of multiple causation, which obviously I've talked about a lot in history class. And one of those things is imperialism. So all these European countries are all scrambling to try and have these overseas colonies. It's a matter of prestige, and there's quite a bit of conflict about who's going to control what portions. And then there's also the need to support these different colonies in terms of having navies that can keep the seaways open so that the European countries can basically take all the natural resources from these places and bring them back to their factories. You also have nationalism. Italy in 1860s, Germany in the 1870s actually become countries for the first time. So there was a bunch of different principalities. They spoke common language, but these were not nations yet. And Germany and Italy, both through the process of war, become nations. Nationalism is very strong. Serbia is another area that has very strong nationalism. People promote the culture and the language. And then militarism. So we get into a naval arms race. So you see here some pictures of some battleships. And the top one you see looks kind of like a yacht, has some little small guns on the side. You know, that was a battleship from late 1890s. And below that, you see a battleship entering into World War I. And so, particularly in Germany and England, but also in the United States, Japan, France, a lot of countries built up their navies, and it was this sort of naval arms race, who could build the most ships the quickest. And so it kind of put people in that mindset of the military and how well equipped the military is going to be. And then this last piece is called the Entangling Alliances piece. So you have the Entente, which is originally Britain, France, and Russia, against the Central Powers, which is Austria and Germany. And the whole idea is if one country was invaded, then another country was going to come to its aid. And so they agreed to fight alongside each other no matter what. So the actual catalyst, the event that set everything off, is the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. And it was done with Serbian complicity. In other words, the Serbian government is believed to have helped because there were quite a few Serbians that lived in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Serbia wanted them to be free. And so Austria issues this ultimatum to Serbia and tells them, you know, there's a bunch of demands, and some of them pretty drastic. And Serbia actually agrees to all of them except for one. So Austria mobilizes its forces on July 28th, and then it's this cascading effect. Everybody starts to mobilize their military, and part of it is these reasons I have listed here, the strict timetable of train movements. You got to move first or you're not going to win. And they've obviously got to honor the alliances. And this little graphic up here is the Schlieffen Plan, which the whole idea was that the German armies were going to go through neutral Belgium to invade France. And there's a lot of repercussions that come from that later. So World War I has changed the face of warfare. You see a picture of the trenches. You see a picture of Germans manning a machine gun with gas masks on. And so again, just sort of a blow up. These are the primary belligerents, if you will, in the war. The yellow being the Central Powers and the green being the Allied powers of the Entente. What's interesting about this war is it really is a world war. It takes place all over. In Africa, actually, over 1 million people die in something that they really have no stake in. I mean, these are people that have been invaded and subjugated as colonies. So it is a different kind of war. High casualty count. There's these new weapons, machine guns, chemical weapons, artillery. And artillery existed before this, but not to this degree. Becomes trench warfare, defensive war. So there's not a lot of mobility. And it was thought to be, that it was going to be a quick war. Everybody's going to be home by Christmas. It starts in August of 1914, while it drags on for 4.5 years. And then it's also kind of our first example of total war. All the nation's resources are devoted to war. Civilians are not safe. And so it is a different kind of war. So the $64,000 question is, why does the U.S. get involved in what is essentially a European war? Again, it is fought in a lot of different places, but when it's fought in Asia, when it's fought in Africa, this is because of the European powers and their colonies and sort of their disagreements, not necessarily involvement of or voluntary involvement of the people that live in those places. So, I mean, why would the U.S. get involved? How does it affect the U.S.? So down in the comments, what I want you to do is I want you to tell me is, why do you think the U.S. got involved in this European war? Try not to, look at a book or read anything online. Just, what could possibly make the United States want to get involved in this war that's really taking place in Europe? All right, go ahead and put those down in the comments section, and I will talk to you all on Thursday. And don't anybody be worried. We're going to talk about what you want to write for your next essay. So it's going to be related to Washington State history, but I'm going to give you a lot of leeway under that heading. And so we're going to talk about maybe some ideas of what you'd like to write, and then we'll get started on those essays when we get back from spring break. All right, enjoy the rest of your day.